Richard Dawkins has said that Darwinian evolution has made it possible to be an intellectually fulfilled atheist. So he really does think that Darwinian evolution is the answer to theism.
Yeah, he does seem to think that, although he himself admits that Darwinian evolution doesn't do anything to explain away the fine-tuning. He thinks that that has yet to be explained, that there really is no good explanation for that. And when I looked at his chapter in the God Delusion on the arguments for the existence of God, I was rather surprised, Kevin, by frankly how superficial his handling of the arguments are. For example, I think that he says nothing in response to the Leibnizian argument from contingency, the argument that there needs to be an explanation for why something exists rather than nothing. He has nothing about the Kalam Cosmological Argument, the argument that there was a beginning of the universe and therefore the universe needs to have a transcendent cause. He talks about the design argument, but he doesn't deal with the fine-tuning. He only deals with the biological aspects of it, but has nothing to offer in terms of how you can explain the fine-tuning of the universe, of the Big Bang for intelligent life. The moral argument, here he's just completely inconsistent. On the one hand, he grants the premise that if God does not exist, there are no objective moral values and duties. He's very clear that he thinks that morality is just basically a human illusion. But on the other hand, over and over again in the book, he makes moral judgments and affirms moral truths, and therefore affirms the second premise of the moral argument, that objective moral values exist. So he doesn't refute that argument. And then finally, the ontological argument, oddly enough, he spends the most time on that one. He spends several pages on the ontological argument, but if you look at it, all it is ridicule. He doesn't know anything about Alvin Plantinga's defense of the ontological argument. He just mocks it and makes fun of it. And it's very clear he doesn't know the literature, that he's not familiar with the argument. So I was very unimpressed, quite honestly, looking at his handling of the arguments for God's existence.
I'm curious about a quote attributed to him, and that is, the study of biology, the challenge there is that you're examining systems that look as if they're designed.
Right, and he says you need to constantly remind yourself that they're not.
Why not just say, well, maybe because they are?
Right.
Your naturalism isn't going to let you say that, I don't guess. Dr. Craig, you've debated the top atheist thinkers in the world on university campuses and at other events. What about a debate with Dawkins?
Well, I'd welcome it. I would like to have a debate with Dawkins. In fact, I recently had a UK debating and speaking tour that took me to quite a number of British universities. It was set up by InterVarsity Christian Fellowship in the UK. And the board of directors chairman, Peter May of InterVarsity, wrote a very nice letter to Richard Dawkins at Oxford, in which he explained that William Lane Craig was coming to Great Britain on a university speaking tour, that I was a philosopher interested in philosophy of science, and wanted to know if he would be interested in participating in a debate with me on the existence of God. So it wasn't about creation evolution. I wasn't presented as a religious person or theologian, but as a philosopher of science. And the letter that Dawkins sent back to Peter May said, I don't know who William Lane Craig is, and if I were to debate a religious person, he would have to be at least a bishop. And while a debate with Craig might look good on Craig's resume, it wouldn't look good on mine. And therefore he declined to engage. And so I didn't have the chance to debate with Dawkins.
Daniel Dennett is another author. He's got a best-selling book called Breaking the Spell.
Yes.
Implications there of religion. What is his take?
Well, again, Dennett is an interesting character. I was just at a conference with him in New Orleans a couple of months ago on atheism and theism, and he was debating Alistair McGrath on this topic. And then several of us were invited to give comments on the whole debate. I was one of them. Keith Parsons was another. And I decided I would look at Dennett's response to the typical arguments for the existence of God, since he doesn't think there are any good reasons. And again, Kevin, I was shocked. This man is an eminent philosopher at Tufts University. This is not some popularizer. And yet, if you looked at his responses to the typical arguments for the existence of God. George Smith does a better job, a popularizer than what Dennett did. For example, his response to the Kalam Cosmological Argument, which says that whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. He agrees with the first premise, that anything that begins to exist must have a cause that brings it into being. He agrees with the second premise. He thinks the universe began to exist and that the Big Bang gives good evidence of that. So he agrees with the conclusion, the universe has a cause. But here's his answer to the argument. Yeah, the universe has a cause. The universe caused itself. The universe brought itself into being. He says it's the ultimate bootstrapping trick. The universe, pulled itself up by its own bootstraps. It brought itself into existence. And I pointed out to him, in order for the universe to bring itself into existence, it would have to exist before it existed.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's not self-caused. It would be uncaused. It would come out of nothing. So his view would be that the universe had to exist before it existed, which is a self-contradiction.
Yeah.
It's logically incoherent. And yet this was his response to the cosmological argument.
Yeah, imagine he'll find another one after that conference.
I think so. It was funny because after I presented my response, there was applause from the audience, and then he was invited to give an impromptu reaction. And he walked up to the podium and he just stood there looking out at the audience for a minute or a moment in silence. And then he said, "That was a virtuoso performance."
A good compliment.
And basically had nothing more to say. What his answer was, well, he said, I guess what this shows is that when you have plausible premises leading to an implausible conclusion, then I guess you've got to go back and deny one of those plausible premises after all. And that was his response.
Yeah. He seems to kind of lean on psychology a little bit and evolution, Darwinian evolution, as an explanation for how religion evolved. And I'm not totally familiar with the argument there. You may be.
Well,
though,
he's a Richard Dawkins fan in that he thinks there are these things called memes, which are kind of like cultural, not institutions, or cultural factors or features that get spread by reproducing themselves,
they're
almost
like
genes biologically, except they're cultural. They're called memes. They're like cultural genes. And religion would be one of these. Well, in the Q&A, what I pointed out to him, I said, if that's true, and he thinks that everything we think is like that, all of our ideas are like that. I said, if that's true, that would apply to your own ideas as well. Really, what you've been sharing with us here, this idea of these memes, this is just sort of like a contagion that you've caught from Richard Dawkins, and you're just sharing with us this intellectual disease that you've contracted.
My view on memes is caused by memes.
Right, and so it was really a self-defeating position if taken seriously. And again, he really didn't have any good answer to this self-refuting position he was in. It's like the man who saws off the branch that he's seated on.